Hey guys, how you doing? I hope you're good. I'm back just to add an extra couple of little things to the video I put up last week about ways of keeping a VO session flowing in Pro Tools. So last time I was talking about insertion follows playhead and a couple of other little things. Just to really quickly recap. So insertion follows playhead, toggle it on with N. You're in record, come out of record, 0, 3, go back into record. And Pro Tools records the next region immediately after the last region you recorded. So 0, 3, out of record, back in, keeps on recording down the timeline. I also talked about pressing down to get your edit point to jump to where the playhead is, and then right to focus on that area of the timeline. So you've done your edits further back in the timeline, and then you can jump to where Pro Tools is currently in record and where the VO talent is at. There's another bit of functionality in Pro Tools that will have a very similar result to pressing down and right in this scenario, and that's option return. So option return jumps to the end of your session. Return jumps to the beginning, option return jumps to the end. And so if you're recording wild VO down a timeline, option return is essentially going to do the same thing. We'll just let it go off the screen there. Option return, we jump to the end of the session. Now the reason I don't use this and I use the down and right function I showed you last time is that in other recording situations where you are currently recording in the timeline isn't necessarily going to be the end of the session. It is generally when you're recording wild VO, but in other scenarios it's not. So just for the sake of muscle memory, if I want to jump to where Pro Tools is recording, I press down and right. However, option return does help us keep the flow of a session like this going in some other ways. So if we're in record here, and we're back here doing our edits, and then the director wants to hear that edit, you have to come out of record, click back here, and Pro Tools records to play it, and then you want to really quickly jump to the end of the timeline and carry on recording. So instead of scrolling or zooming out and clicking and zooming back in, that's when I would use option return, and then you can jump back into record. And as long as there isn't anything else further down the timeline, which would generally be the case when you're recording wild VO, that will work for you. So that's when I'd use option return. And if I'm in record, I would use down and right, just for the sake of getting that muscle memory. So that was the first little thing I wanted to show you. The next little tip is, again, about doing edits back here in the timeline and staying in record and keeping the flow going. If you do an edit like this, you might need to combine it into one file ready for export at the end of the session. And the shortcut to do this is Option Shift 3. It consolidates your regions. However, if you're in record, I'm just going to undo that. If you're in record and you do that, nothing happens. It doesn't work. I assume this is to do with the way that Pro Tools is buffering and writing the current file in record to memory and how it wants to write the file that you're trying to consolidate. There's a conflict there and it doesn't want to do it. However, there's a little cheat and a way to get around it. And that is by opening up an Audio Suite plugin. You can use any Audio Suite plugin. I tend to use Gain. Keep it set to essentially do nothing. So just set to do 0 dB of gain in this instance. Have your drop down here set to create continuous file. And then while Pro Tools is in record, you can render the regions that you've got selected and it will create a new consolidated file for you. So that's the little cheat and the little workaround that I use to stay in record and be consolidating regions and edits that I've made further back in the timeline. I tend to have this little target button here clicked off, and that means that any other plugin that I open or whatever, this is still going to stay open. So I just have this floating in the bottom of my screen all the time, and it's just my little consolidate regions functionality. And that's it. I hope those extra little bits help further in keeping your Pro Tools sessions flowing. And I'll be back with another tip.